David, you can hear me?
Yes, a little louder would be better, but
Now you can hear me better?
better.
Great.
So we'll wait for a moment. This is Rabbi Sam Kay from Holy Blossom,
Hello,
where
Rabbi.
out of which the Israel Dialogues is administratively based.
Yes, thank you, David. Ariel, Naimad,
Naima, how are you?
Baruch Hashem.
Good to hear.
We are at time, so I will just say a word or two of greetings to those of you who are here with us. Thank you very much for joining us today for the Israel Dialogues. We have a very timely and important conversation today about the invisible hands that move elements of the wars that we have seen and the wars that we are seeing. And we have a wonderful expert with us. I'm going to hand it over, as we always do, to David to introduce both the panel and our guest. And I just want to, of course, briefly state that it's been a very challenging week here in Toronto for the Jewish community. The second week in a row where synagogues have been actively targeted by people in the middle of the night shooting at us, and that the reverberations of whether this is the conflict that we see here or whether this is our own thing is a hotly debated topic, and a painful one. And so I'll just remind all of you who are local and those of you who are not local as well that if you are feeling anxiety around coming to synagogue, if you are feeling like you are being dragged into this, if you are feeling targeted, that your clergy are here for you, that the rabbis are here to talk. And if you need encouragement and if you need solace, if you need comfort, we're here to support you at this time. So thank you very much, as always, for joining us for this important conversation. And David, I hand it to you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Much appreciated. So it's not unusual, or these days, to say that we are at unusual times. Uh, so it's a real pleasure to be able to host Dr. Ariel Admoni, who's affiliated with both Bar-Ilan University and Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and perhaps other think tanks and institutions in Israel and abroad. Um, Ariel is one of those individuals who is the next generation of Israeli scholars who is emerging with an important voice and insight into a country and a region that obviously has always been relevant and important to Middle East affairs, security, the economy, diplomacy, and in particular over decades now to the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. But I think it's fair to say that there aren't all that many experts in the Western world, at least, uh, who can speak knowledgeably about not just the history of Qatar, but Qatar in current affairs. So it's really both timely and important that Ariel, you have found the ability, the time to give to us today. So with that, let me turn it over to you. I believe Rabbi K has made sure that you are a co-host, so that should you have a PowerPoint, you can use it now.
So, first, thank for a warm introduction of both of you. And Rabbi, I'm sorry to hear about the difficult times you experienced. In my little place, Israel, I have to say first, if it's gonna be alarm here, I need to go to the shelter, so I gonna leave you for a few minutes. But just that don't think I do it on purpose. It's Iran, it's not me. Anyway, as David kindly pointed out, my focus is on Qatar, and I think that when I started my MA thesis people ask me if I study a real country, and nobody asks me that anymore. And I think that the understanding about the problematic and the danger this country poses to the Western world in general, I don't think just Israel, is why we see the awareness become bigger. And for that reason, I think it's important to go back to the history background. For that, my first half of my lecture will focus on the foundation. And after that, I will focus more on the, let's say, Qatari conundrum during the last war. But I hope first everybody can see right now my presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I hate self-promotion, but I just gave a little places that they talk about Qatar. Um, I think that reflects the fact that the knowledge about Qatar in the West is kind of poor, and some of it's influenced by disinformation campaign or paid influencers. And for that reason, it's difficult to navigate in all of the data. And this is why platforms like yours, this platform is so important. So when we talk about Qatar, we need to remember first that if we take the whole map, as you see on screen, it's kind of difficult to find Qatar located on the map. It's very small country. It's located in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, because some call it the Persian Gulf, and it's not. Trump actually was confused by that in his first term. But when we talk about Qatar, we need to remember it's a small country. And it's important to remember it for, according to some surveys, it's number 37 in the world in terms of population, in terms of size. They are half from Israel. Actually, you can see here the state symbol in Arabic and English, the state of Qatar, and in Arabic, Dawla Qatar. The joke in the 1950s was that if it wasn't written on the symbol that it's a state, nobody gonna know it. And this kind of understanding is important. Actually, let me give you a picture that's not here on the screen. During the World Cup in 2022, Qatar was very proud that unlike the previous World Cup in Russia, that you need to go a lot of miles between stadiums, in Qatar, it's all close to you. 55 kilometers. They are proud the fact that from Al Bayt Stadium to Lusail Stadium, because for them, one of Qatari scholars pointed out in a book, our smallness is actually our source of strength. And this kind of narrative is very, very important to Qatari raise on the thread that we're gonna see during my presentation. But I think that if we talk about Qatar, it's important not just to talk about state, but actually kind of see it. This is why, and I'm not very proud in my technical capabilities, I will try to share a video for a few seconds. That's just that you can experience the state. So a minute. It's actually a tourist guide or travel guide about Doha, and it's actually can give you good understanding, I think, the state and about the different angles. Just a second. Let me see if I can make it right now. I think right now, I hope, yeah. You can see it right now?
Junkies seeking thrill.
You can hear and can see? Great. I will show you just a few seconds. I want you to get the experience, and I will talk about it later. Just remember the opening photo that you can see right now. It's important to my point.
Thrilling experiences, or someone who simply loves immersing themselves in history and tradition, we've got you covered with our list of top things to do in Doha, Qatar. Number 11. Walk around the Souk Waqif. This traditional market, located in the heart of Qatar's capital city, offers an authentic taste of Middle Eastern culture and history. As you navigate through its winding alleys adorned with colorful lanterns and bustling shopkeepers, you'll discover countless treasures waiting to be uncovered. From exquisite spices to intricate handicrafts, Souk Waqif is more than just a shopping destination. It provides visitors with an immersive journey into Qatari heritage thanks to its striking architecture and various activities on offer. For instance, at the Falcon Souk area within the marketplace, you'll have the opportunity to hold majestic falcons and learn about their importance in local culture. Additionally, curious tourists can marvel at camels and horses that played a significant role in shaping Qatar's past. After exploring these fascinating sites, make sure not to miss out on delicious local cuisine served by one of many restaurants nestled between shops, or even booking a stay at charming boutique hotels imbued with Arabian aesthetics for an unforgettable travel experience in Doha. Number 10. Be amazed by the Pearl Qatar.
That's enough for now. I just gave you one location, Souk Waqif, and the second, the Pearl, and that can capitalize the story of Qatar. Why? Because as you see in the video, you saw camels, you saw falcons, you can see the gold, you can see the luxury, but you can see how Qatar try in a very systematic manner to present itself as very traditional. But as you also see by the hotels, de facto it's a very, very westernized state. And this kind of dilemma, may I say, between the traditional aspect and the westernized aspect is a motive that appeared time and time again in Qatar. Why? You can see it, for an example, in the Pearl Qatar. This island is familiar with one of the first Qatari source of income, the pearls, in the 1920s. And it's traditional in souks and others, but it was one of the first places that began 20 years ago to sell alcohol to foreigners in Qatar. A move that was welcomed by outrage in Qatar, because you take our tradition and you actually, in terms that you destroyed our culture in names of opening our borders to different cultures. This kind of dilemma is the dilemma that we can see in Qatar time and time again. So let me back to our presentation. So as we talk about the state, we talk about a small state that is very, very highlights the tradition aspect. For that reason, we need to remember that it's not a democracy, it's a hereditary ruling. You can see right now Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. He now the ruling Emir in Qatar for more than a decade. And actually, you can see him now, but during the war, you can't see Tamim. It's actually vanished from the map. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, in the background of Tamim, you can see his father, Hamed. Hamed took the country and transformed it to the way that we all talk about it right now. And behind Hamed, in the shadows, you can see previous rulers, not less important, but less, let's say, westernized or well immersed in geopolitical context. Just you have the names Khalifa bin Hamad al-Thani, Ahmed bin Hamad al-Thani, Abdallah al-Thani, and the fact that al-Thani family is the most prominent family in the Emirate is an important factor we need to remember because it's very, very centralized state. So, when we talk about the state, I mentioned before the Pers, we talk about the state that not long ago wasn't a place that everybody wants to go there. There was a saying by the British representative in Doha in 1940. He complained to his supervisor that sent him to Doha in 1940 that I can't do nothing here. There isn't nothing to do here. As he wrote it, I play badminton with the wind. There is nothing to do here. And the other scholar actually was amazed by the fact that the locals was surprised to learn about football because not a while ago it was a state, and the photos that I bring you here, it's from Qatari website. It's not from a negative website that try to portray Qatar as young. Qatar itself highlight the fact that we were nothing, let's say half a century ago. And when we talk about the resources that turn Qatar to the state we're talking about right now, first, we need to talk about the pearls. The pearls were the first resource that Qatar enjoyed. The Al-Thani family were very invested in the merchant in general and pearl merchant in particular. You can see it not just by photos, but also by the fact that current Qatari platforms, Al Jazeera, we all know, but also Qatar Digital Library, that still preserved this tradition. Also, we mentioned before, you can see up in left, right, sorry, right, and the Bar-Ilan, you can see the fact that still this tradition is preserved, and some families in the state, for Al Fardan, for example, still preserving this tradition as an economic sector. But let's say, frankly, in the 1930s, Japan started to produce not authentic pearls and kind of kill the market. And for that reason, Qatar in the 1940s is a poor country during World War II. It's a state that relies on foreign aid and mainly British. And for that reason, the blessing was, of course, the black gold. The black gold, that petroleum, was the factor that changed Qatari life. Qatari residents in the 1960s actually portrayed the fact that the society changed in the front of their eyes because suddenly there is a massive wealth that got into the country. We can see it in the fact that Qatar Petroleum, until this day, is a company that part of the company, actually, when we get to that in a minute, but it's a company that is important to Qatar geopolitics and energy sector. But at the same time, we need to remember two things. First, as you can see by the graph here, the table here, Qatar is not the first in oil output. For that reason, if we can talk about what's happening right now in the Gulf, unlike Saudi Arabia or the UAE that can be troubled by the fact that the oil markets take a hit, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, actually for Qatar, oil it's not the main resource. They have less than the UAE. But in Saudi Arabia, their main source is gas, and we get to that in a minute. But also, we need to remember the fact that, as you can see from the caricatures here on screen, that oil is just geopolitical asset. And for that reason, I hope you're going to see it when I present it full screen. You can see it right now, David? Just now you can see. Give me a Rabbi. You can see now that I can
I can
pass the screen.
I can see the screen about the petroleum,
Okay,
but that's the
and it's
last thing I
rose
can see.
or huh?
The last one I
Okay.
have is the Qatar petroleum with the oil reserves, the gas reserves, the production.
Okay, and
No,
when I see it in F5 full screen mode presentation, you can see it or not?
it hasn't changed yet.
Never mind. It's not, again, with technical details.
Always
Anyway,
the technology. Yes.
exactly. The reason I mention it here, because I want to see it, you can see it. So for that reason, I'm going to do it like that, and then like that. Okay. Because what you can see here, that to talk about Qatari petroleum as a geopolitical asset is actually not new. Just after October 7th, we saw reports here on a less known Qatari channel, Doha News, the fact that there was a discussion if embargo of oil, it's an option. Because in 1973, in Yom Kippur War, Qatar was part of the coalition of OPEC that actually boycotts the oil. They didn't get much attention because Saudi Arabia take the lead, but Qatar was there. And for that reason, from 1973 to this day, the question about the oil as a source that can leverage geopolitical pressure or global economy shaken and afraid. Actually, there was one Palestinian commenter during the last week that say, now you can see what's important to the GCC. When Qatar want, they know how to freeze their assets. For us, they didn't do so. So you can see the discourse about the oil reserves and the gas reserves as a factor that not just economic one, but also a geopolitical. But the oil sector is also important because it goes directly also not just to the foreign policies of Qatar, but also internal policies of Qatar. Because the oil industry and later on another sectors like tourism compelled Qatar to bring a lot of foreign expats. And this was kind of problematic for Qatar because right now, as even a Qatari resident admits, the balance in Qatar is distorted because there are more Qatari residents that are not from Qatari origin, that Qatari origin, born and raised Qataris. And this kind of balance is problematic for Qatar. You can see it by the fact that Qatar present every year the number of the resident in state, 3 million and counting, but they didn't publish the division. What about who are the residents for short-term on visa and who are the one that's gonna stay here? There are different estimates. The radical ones say that Qatari residents born and raised as of just mentioned that less than 500,000. And this is the number that everyone around it. But more than the numbers, we need to remember the fact that, and we saw it during the World Cup, that the residents and the born and raised Qataris are not equal in their terms of living. Because we see it on the horrific reports during the World Cup about the stadiums that workers compelled to work in hours in the heated in strongest heat. And we can see it, you can see here by Amnesty International reports about the grim reality, about the terms of living. We can see it by the fact that there were reports by The Guardian about the deaths of a lot of foreign workers. And Qatar knows the reputation in this context because they need to balance. Because as we mentioned before, this is a country they need to preserve the balance between a westernized option and the traditional option. And for that reason, you can see here a map of resident complex. Because Qatar actually tried to place foreigners and Qataris in different places in order to not that the population will not gonna be, let's say, interweddings or connection that are more than just work related. And this kind of connection that sometimes seems harsh because we saw it in terms of kafala. Before the World Cup, there was an arrangement in Qatar that you as a foreign worker from, let's say, India, come to the state and you actually need to deposit your visa at your employer, and he actually can hold the visa until he got enough of you. And it's kind as some Western publication pointed out, it's a modern way of slavery. And for that reason, during the World Cup, because of the outcry on the system, Qatar promised to reform the system. And according to some reports, it was mainly a lip service because the essential stays the same. But we need to remember two things in this conduction. First, as you can see here for the video, I gave you a screenshot of it. For a Bengali workers or an Indian worker, sometimes it's said to say that, but it's not gonna complain because the terms of living in the origin state is actually worse. And here, at least he can make some money. For that reason, when you can see reports about Qatari policy harassment, for us, it's horrible. But for the Indian-born resident, it's not so devastating like we can see it. And this is why sometimes the reports about these horrific cases is less known. And the second one is kind of funny story. You can see here a picture about two hands. As you can see it in the slogan, One Love. The Qatari National Day, 13 years ago, was under the slogan One Love because they hear the complaints in the Western media about the fact that foreign workers are being subjected to horrific extents, and they try to project an image, a positive image, and for that reason, the National Day of 2013 was under the slogan One Love. It was about the fact that we need to reconnect more inside the population, but on the Qatari Corniche, when it was an event during the National Day, like every Independence Day, actually foreign residents wouldn't allowed to enter the events that designate under the banner One Love. Because in Qatar, we need to remember there is the PR campaign and there is the harsh reality. And this is important to remember when we talk about Qatar. The foreign workers were crucial to Qatar also in the vast resource that now if everyone in the world talk about gas, because Qatar Petroleum and Qatar Gas actually emerged into Qatar Energy, a company state that run under Qatar Energy Minister Saad Sharif Akabi, because in Qatar there isn't much differentiation between state and state companies and the private sector. And Qatar is number 3 or number 4, depends on who you ask, in terms of the largest country with gas reserves. Their gas source is from South Fares or North Field. It's a joint Qatari-Iranian field. This is a crucial component when we talk about the relations of the Qatari regime with the Iranian regime even these days. And unlike Iran, they, let's say, took their sweet time and start to extract gas. Let's say 20 years ago, Qatar was there from the 1990s. They produced it from I think the first gas block was in 1988, and from there Qatar started to produce produce energy, liquefied natural gas. You can see here on Total Energy from France, you can see it in Beijing, you can see it in India, you can see the fact there was discussion in Pakistan, you can see it also in Germany. In the cartoon here, you can see right after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, how it became unpopular to buy gas from Russia. So Germany found the second best place, Qatar. The falcon here with the Qatari flag, it's an example to the fact that even after October 7th, we can see how Germany kind of have no other option. They needed the Qataris for the gas. But one other component we can see here is the small picture. The fact that Qatar Energy also invested in US infrastructure like Golden Pass in Texas, 70% in their share. And for that reason, it's not just the Qatari gas. It's the investment in gas that allowed Qatar and enabled Qatar with a very, very unique position in terms of geopolitical economics. So, the dissonance that you can see in our state, in our conversation, or my lecture actually, is the fact that we talk about a state that is very a micro state, as David put it before, but have a very heavy influence and strong dominance worldwide. We need to go back from where it began. In the 1990s, when gas started to pour its money inside the state, and the oil is already there, and there is actually a new leadership in Qatar. Hamad bin Khalifa overthrow his father, Khalifa bin Hamad. And Qatar start, as you can see it in the New York Times, to punch above its weight. As the foreign ministry and later prime minister said it, we don't want to take orders. The raison d'etre of Qatar change in terms that we want to call the shots. You can see it by two initiatives that in the 1990s nobody heard of, and right now we can't imagine the world without them. The small one, is Qatar Airways. Qatar Airways actually established in 1994, and is because the launching didn't get much attention. In 1997, the Emir Hamad actually relaunched the company, and in his inaugural address, he said it's gonna be the best airline in the world. Now, at the time, nobody covered this statement because nobody cared from this statement, and they gave the sponsorship to UEFA. It's right now Qatar Airways have shares in Heathrow, and Qatar Airways, it's actually capture the raised on the threat of Qatar to a dominant global discourse. You can see it also by the fact they chose traditional, again, the traditional aspect as their symbol. I don't know, wow, the animal that here on their symbol is actually more, it's more in Bahrain than Qatar, but Qatar took the credit. And the second initiatives that enable Qatar to position itself so widely recognizable is the fact that this small building that I think that everyone in the world right now can identify the symbol, Al Jazeera. Now, when we remember Al Jazeera, we need to remember that in Arabic, terms and names have meaning and have ideology behind it. And Al Jazeera in Arabic, Shiba Al Jazeera, it's mean the peninsula. And when we think about the peninsula, we think about the Arabian Peninsula. But as a matter of fact, this was the Qatari narrative, the narrative that we are the focus of the world, the Qatari Peninsula. We are gonna affect how the world perceives the Arab world in general through our lens. You can see it by the fact that when the Saudis get on board, they chose El Arabiya. If you are Al Jazeera, if you are the prominent peninsula, we are the prominent Arabs because it's a different and competing narratives. But don't worry, Qatar knows very well how to position itself also in the Arabian discourse. You can see the fact that the Emir and the leadership portray the World Cup as a championship for all Arabs. If anyone remember how the World Cup ends with Messi dressed with the traditional bishet, it's not a coincidence. It's a symbol that we want to project to the world. We are now the focus of the world, and we are presenting you the Arab image. For that reason, you can see in the last FIFA Arab Cup, the fact that Qatar chose as a symbol the Jawha. Jawha, it's kind of like Herschele in Jewish tradition. It's not a very respectable image. It's kind of goofy one. But Qatar want to present a different image. We are trying to reform and to present the Arab world in a respectable manner. You are gonna hear about the Arab world in a favorable manner thanks to us. And this kind of image was projected to the world when tourists came during the World Cup to Doha. They actually mentioned the fact there was Muhammad saying on the walls, because we are trying to project the world an Islamic narrative, an Arabic narrative. And for that reason, we can see how the World Cup ends when was when the final, when Messi got dressed in this traditional cloak? It was on December 18. Now, and I try to gauge your memory, the World Cup wasn't supposed to be on December. It's supposed to be in summer. But because of the heat, Qatar convinced FIFA, may I say, also in not so delicate manner and allegation of corruption, to change the date to the winter. And Qatar specifically asked that December 18, the National Day of Qatar, will be the time that the final will gonna be held. Because when outside the stadium, Qatari flags and camels about the National Day will be presented, all the world gonna see us and the focus of the attention. And actually, it's I think that some of you may be well aware of this policy, as it's called soft power. the way you use investment in sport, in green initiatives, in real estate, as you can see here in the UK. You can see the fact that Qatar used this leverage not just to create themselves a positive image in the world, but actually held a geopolitical level on a different state. Just to give you one example, a report a year ago was astonished to discover that in London, the Qatari royal family held more assets than the Britain royal family. And when you took it in mind, and you can see the fact that in December 2024, when Qatari Emir was in Britain, King Charles actually tried, it was very hard for him, to say Salam Alaikum. And 2 days later in London, there was a gathering, a gala, that's actually held from high-ranking officials. They tried to extract more investment. Rolls-Royce got a nice share from this visit. Also, Sandhurst, the academic military. Sandhurst is actually, Tamim has a soft spot for them because he was educated there, and his father, Hamid, also educated in Sandhurst. Because again, we talk about traditional and the fact that Tamim here is in traditional dressing next to King Charles and Sheikha Johar, his wife. Actually, one is one of his wives, he has 4. But the traditional aspect, but you need to remember, its education wasn't inside Qatar, because most of the royal family, most of the elite in Qatar, gonna send their sons to Georgetown, to Yale. They're not gonna send their sons to Qatar University. Now, when we talk about the fact that just after October 7th, British representative, Nepali representative approach Qatar and ask them for help, communicate with Hamas, we can see the fact that it wasn't merely you can talk with Hamas because you know them. Because in Britain, and let me skip a little, it was kind of astonishing to discover. You can see here the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak with Qatari Emir. Now, it was an absurd situation. 4 days after October 7th, the same Rishi Sunak declared we need to sanction Qatar because they are the hosting of Hamas. And it took only 2 weeks to the same Rishi Sunak to praise Qatar for mediation. Now, it's not just mediation. We need to remember when Qatar held so much leverage, and we can see right now the reports about the GCC countries in general and also Qatar, that when they try to pressure Trump or other states regarding their stance for vis-a-vis Iran, some of them say, look, we have assets in your country. If you want us to live with our money, it's gonna be devastating for your economy. And for that reason, we need to remember it's not just, hey, you can talk with a terrorist. It's also economic angle. But indeed, it's also the fact that Qatar leveraged their connection with terrorists in a way that was very beneficial. You can see here the fact that it was about Qatari connection with the Islamist movements in Mali. It was about the fact that Jabhat al-Nusra, and Hamas, and the Taliban, and ISIS, there were reports about Qatari funding, sometimes masked under humanitarian facade. For an example, there was sound callous, but humoristic example. During, you can see here, Mariam bit Misna Zafran. She is the international minister for cooperation, and she visiting the Taliban regime a year ago. And actually, some of the Taliban's officials and residents tried to censor her face because it's a woman, it's Islamist regime. But the fact that the leadership was well aware that this visit will include a lot of paychecks, so we need to bite our upper teeth and the stomach to host them. And this is from the Taliban angle, but we need to remember, just after Biden retreat from Afghanistan, his Secretary of State Blinken said it's very clear, we need Qatar to be our eyes in Kabul. We need someone to communicate with them. Maybe the most problematic example you can see here by the two Qatari brothers. Meet the Al Hayat family, Motaz and Barashim. Motaz and Barashim are both businessmen that let's say it was 6-7 years ago, was actually indicted in a London court about funding jihadists. And now they have corporation that half a year ago, under a blessing by Trump envoy, right now it's one the biggest conglomerate supplying electricity to Syria. Now you can see here how the connection with terrorists translate itself as a mediator, at the same time also to the business angle. Now, we talk about Syria, we talk about Taliban, but let's be honest, the main example here is Hamas. Now, there is a reason I gave you a screenshot about how Qatar became the mediator, but I refuse to present you the real video. Because as you can see, hiding Blinken face, it's from the Middle East Eye. Middle East Eye is a Qatari channel. And I don't want to promote the Qatari narrative about their connection with Hamas, because they're gonna say to you that just after Obama asked us to host Hamas, we began to help, and right now we communicate with Hamas just for diplomatic purposes. Now it's transparent lie. There is a funding from Qatar to Jama al-Islamiyah, the previous organization of Ahmad Yassin, before it was called Hamas, and already then it was Qatari funding. And for that reason, to claim we did it just when Obama asked, let's be honest, it's not, it's just real life. Anyway, but it's sad, but when Britain needed this false report, they managed. Germany also relied on this explanation when they tried to explain after October 7th how we gonna buy gas from a state. The Bild newspaper actually was published a news headline when the Qatari Emir visited 3 days after October 7th. He called it the visiting of the bloody Emir. And the German government was in a bind because they wanted the gas, but they couldn't sin with the state that support Hamas. For that reason, you can see here also just stills, not just a photo, because this was the demand by the German government to cancel the video and the interviews from the visit. But it's, again, Germany and Britain are just examples. You can see it, for an example, their Qatari influence in Biden area and also in Trump area. You can see the fact that sometimes it's by the official states and state officials, but at the same time, it's gonna be by influencers in TikToks and other platforms. And you can see here that it's Biden administration and Trump administration. Their change, the policies wasn't changed when in terms of Qatar. Now, when we talk about the base, and I want to just finish that point, and then I want just talk briefly about the war, but I think that it's better that you have questions and then I'm gonna answer them. But just we need to remember when you talk about Qatar, the fact that when we talk about the US Qatari connection, we need to remember several factors. First, Biden designated them as the major non-NATO ally, mainly because of the base. The base that just 4 months after October 7th, the Biden administration actually reached an agreement with them to keep the base running. Trump, Biden do it quietly because it was a very problematic decision to make. But Trump, in his visit in May, was very, very eager to present the connection, mainly because the fact that as the previous CENTCOM commander pointed out during a House Armed Service Committee hearing, the US didn't pay for it because, as he mentioned it, let me try to enlarge it, they provide burden sharing in the form of $300 million a year to run those bases, because Qatar is actually paying, feeding the bill. And for that reason, we can see it how just the same month, October 7th, US Space Command and Qatar Armed Force signed the space agreement. For the same reason, we can see the US Ambassador Tim Davis, the previous one. Right now, there isn't one. There are actually more mid-level. And the US ambassador said in April 2025, Qatar trusted broker, and it's go beyond it. It said our default when there is a conflict in the region will be to approach Qatar first. Now, why I mention Tim Davis' name? Because Tim Davis right now is the co-president of Qatari startup under very, very luxurious term. And this is why when we talk about official relations, we need to remember that Qatar knows very well how to leverage this connection. First, it's gonna be delicate. Come to my office, I will bring you, one Israeli official told me, maybe I can give you a scarf, or maybe I can give you a perfume, and it goes beyond that as the time goes. The Israeli official told me that because he refused to the offer if someone wanted. Anyway, this is why we can see it on the reports about Witkoff's son, Steve Witkoff's son, and the fact that Steve Witkoff business deal with the Qataris that actually help him from bankruptcy, with buying the hotel, with real estate expert says that the Witkoff deal wasn't worth the amount that Qatar said they're gonna pay, because it didn't worth the money. And again, the headline, the facade was a business deal. The headline was diplomatic connection. But everyone knows that in Qatar, bribe is part of the equation. Now, I can bring the other presentation about Qatar in the war, but I think it's better that I will answer questions. I believe you have some. I can see it in the chat on the raised hand. So
Yes.
let's see.
Ariel, thank you. That was really interesting introduction for all of us about a microstate that is reaching well beyond its own borders and the complexities involved. Uh, so let me remind our viewers that they should submit their comments and questions through the Q&A, and my colleagues, Norm Mogul and Mark Anshin and Shai Manushin, just to raise your hands when you have questions. And there's lots to discuss. So, Norm, I saw your hand
Yes,
first. Please.
I wanted to know more about the use of labor, foreign labor. Are there a lot of Palestinians who work in Qatar, and what is their legal standing? And the second thing, do they influence Qatar's policy towards Israel, and the question of the West Bank and two-state solutions? I mean, is there an element of the Palestinian workers who are having an influence in how Qatar conducts itself?
Okay, so first, great question because it's focused on different angles, the foreign policy and inside. But anyway, first, Qatari Palestinian foreign labor were in Qatar from an early stage. From May, say, from 1949, there was a foreign labor of Palestinians in Qatar. Actually, the British was kind of alarmed by it. But anyway, I think that back then in 1950, 60, 70, they enter a government position as a mustashar, as a consulate to the state officials. And for that reason, the Qatari stance at its beginning and inception was actually relied on the Palestinian narrative. This trend still exists to this day because you can see it, for an example, by Azmi Bshara, a person that's still very influential on the Emir as a consultant in terms of Israel. And Azmi Bshara is an example because at the same time he hold several positions. He have the Emir's ear on terms of advising how Israel will operate and how will be the best to leverage Israeli policies. But at the same time, he also held El Arabi station and academic institutes funding by Qatar. And now it's a problematic because you can see it from the reporting in Al Arabi these days, because they are more in the side of radical Islam, but not in the side of Muslim Brotherhood. And for that reason, there's kind of division when we talk about their policy they're trying to promote. And I think they try to promote a narrative that mainly don't recognize the state of Israel, but at the same time, don't identify itself with Hamas. And for that reason, when the Palestinian ambassador in Qatar, that actually the embassy is very active right now, it was just a month ago, before the war, the Palestinian ambassador, Faiz, if I remember the name correctly, was proud about the agreement he signed with the Qataris about foreign labor to Qatar. But some pointed out, like memory, that this kind of arrangement was designated in the Taliban regime to actually employ soldiers under Qatari contracts. For that reason, when we talk about Qatar, we need to remember it's not just Hamas. They're influential in the Palestinian Authority. The fact that some Palestinian officers are actually educated in military police in Qatar is a component in the equation we need to remember, besides, of course, the Hamas connection.
Mark.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ariel, for your very thorough and comprehensive presentation. I just wanted to continue on the Hamas question. I read, I don't know if it's accurate, but I read a report the other day that Qatar was moving to expel or have the Hamas leaders that are in Qatar, leave Qatar. And I wonder if there's any veracity to that. And if so, what's the current situation with respect to Hamas being embedded within Qatar and Qatar supporting Hamas?
You can't believe how much question I ask about it in Israeli press. I think it's false. I tell you why. Because there were reports about Qatari promise to the Americans, we're gonna expel Hamas several times during the war. It actually was kind of an effective tool for Qatar to, let's say, preserve the Americans on their side, to promise them, we don't support Hamas, we support them just on terms of diplomatic relations. Now, actually, the vice ambassador in Washington, Hamid al-Muftah, when asked about that, he said, we still have a lot of work to do with Hamas. So even the Qataris themselves don't acknowledge this report. And we need to remember two other factors. First, to throw Hamas from Doha right now is very problematic to Qatar, because they're kind of losing the Shiite access right now. The Shiite access in terms of Iran is not longer an optional access they can communicate with as a mediator. They want to be the mediator to the extreme Sunnite affiliation. And for that reason, you can see how YUMS, International Union of Muslim Scholars, the Muslim Brotherhood organization from Qatar, is actually said very freely about the fact that this war is a Zionist, how do you say, Sarbanim? Help me out here.
What's the word?
Tzalbanim in the history.
Crusaders.
Crusader, thanks. Anyway, YUMS and other Muslim Brotherhood from Qatar presented this war as a Crusaders Zionist conspiracy. And Qatar allowed this kind of discourse. And to throw Hamas right now will actually cut their branch in terms of connection with the extreme Sunnite axis. And even if they gonna downgrade connection with Hamas, the real litmus state will be if the funding to Marshall bank account will stop, if Al Jazeera will stop, very, very biased. By the way, biased also in terms of Iran. Even Qatari residents are complaining about Qatari media during the war. So I hope I answered about the different aspect. I don't gonna hold my breath about a friction between Hamas and Qatar.
Good. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you. Back to you, David.
Yeah. Try.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, David. So actually, first, one clarification, just because some of the audience might not know, Azmi Bashar was an Israeli member of Knesset from Balad Party, one of the Arab parties. He fled Israel, got sanctuary in Qatar, and he's the advisor. If I remember correctly, he's also Christian. He's not Muslim. Just as an anecdote, but I'm not sure on this point. Ariel, question about the West. In 2025, I saw a report that says that in 2025 alone, Qatar invested $1.1 billion in U.S. higher education institutions, where unlike many of the regular donations to the institution where you just want to have the name on the institution, in Qatar, it's also a matter of influencing the content and actually appointing specific chairs for specific purposes. At the same time, the UAE announced that it's not going to fund its residents or citizens if they choose to study in the UK because of the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is banned in the UAE as well as in other countries. How do you see? Can you maybe shed some light on the Qatari involvement in higher education in the West, in the UK, and in the US and in Canada, and how it influenced a lot of the academic thinking on the Middle East?
So first, yeah, he is Christian from Azmi Shar, by the way, from Nazareth, according biography. Anyway, about the U.S. higher education. Now, there was a misconception that I think it was after the massive demonstrations, anti-Israel, actually anti-Semite demonstration, that it kind of was that Doha pushed a button and the demonstration was, the demonstration began. I think it's more nuanced concept, because Qatar knew very well how to use the Green-Red Alliance in terms how to use a progressive narratives. Just to give an example, in Doha News, October 7th was presented as the day when the deliberation started because the defenses were broken. And the concept of progressive narratives were very effective tool for Qatar to immerse itself into institutions. Just to give you, not just by education, the fact that in day 3 of the war, Qatar Investment Authority announced they gonna invest in US economy, specifically in green initiatives. It wasn't coincidental. To Trump, they give the fact that we are investing in the US economy. But for the progressive sides, the Democrats, we are giving the terms that we not just the energy state that ruined the world, may I say. No, we are actually helping. And a newspaper like Forbes, for an example, claimed Qatar as the green knight in the climate battle. May I suggest that money exchange hand. But the same perspective came into US higher education. Now, when we examine higher education, we need to remember several factors. First, what Qatar tried to achieve was, at the beginning, to create Doha as a hub. For that reason, to establish Cornell and Georgetown in Qatar, and try to present, as I tried to present in the presentation, an Arabic image. In Georgetown, for an example, the main hall is decorated with swords and Arabic calligraphy, and this was the first goal. We are the one that, may I say, educate the next generation. Now, later on, they discover what an asset they have in their hands, because when US state officials, and later on in other states, you mentioned Canada and others, it became more apparent that you can enter academic circles, you can enter into think tanks, for one example, Brookings, for example, and you can influence understanding. To give you, I don't like to talk about myself, but get an example. I wrote an essay about the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and Qatar. I sent it to one journal, never mind the name, and the response wasn't it not good enough article. I respect it. Sometimes not enough well-respected scholar, it's fine. The reason was Muslim Brotherhood is not connected to terror. This was the reasoning they answered me, because for them to present a Muslim Brotherhood as terror is to undermine their narrative. In the similar manner, you can see Qatari outlets like the Middle East Eye, when the British police in London, I think, but I'm not sure, maybe it was in Liverpool, raided mosques that publish terrorist-supported material. It was portrayed as Islamophobia. And the same messaging appeared also Tucker Carlson, because Islamophobia became a word that Qatar actually tried to, may I say, try to weaken the Europe when they tried to encounter these kind of movements. And eventually, when you're well connected in the university, when you're well connected in hospitals, when you're well connected in civil society, we can see a cooperation with also state officials and even security apparatus. And for that reason, in 2017, there were in France from internal security agency that said, we're well aware that Qatari funding in France go to Muslim Brotherhood, but when we try to demonstrate it to do the Elysee, nobody gonna hear us. Now, the academy is more for the long run, but it's part of this equation.
Thank you. So basically, I mean, for me, it was very interesting, being involved both with the U.S. and Canadian and British Academy. It was very interesting as a signal that the UAE, which is a known rival of Qatar, said to its students, initially they said to the citizens, we're not going to sponsor you if you choose a UK university from next year. Then they added on top of it and said, even if you go using your own funds, we are not going to give UK degrees the same value as we give other degrees. So basically you get a lesser product, which to me was a very strong sign against the Qatari involvement in higher education in the UK and the involvement of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The journal I mentioned before, it was British one. Let me say it like that and stop myself and gonna censor myself.
The other question that I wanted to answer is there is, I don't know if it's collaborated, if it can be collaborated, but there are arguments that the suit that was brought by South Africa to the ICJ on genocide against Israel very early in the war, immediately not that much after October 7, was really financed and arranged behind the stages by Qatar. Is there anything that can support something like that, or this is more of a conspiracy theory?
No, I think, if I'm not mistaken, President Ramaphosa from South Africa announced this intention from Qatar in his state visit, if I'm not mistaken, and I have some data that I collected back then that can substantiate this claim. Now we need to remember, since then, I can give you a link here if you like, there were reports in Israel Foreign Ministry about in the last Venice Biennale that there was an effort by Qatar, according to South Africa Foreign Ministry, to use the Biennale as a platform to project a pro-Palestinian narrative and embarrass Israeli. So the connection between the South African front and Qatar makes sense. We need also to remember the fact that I think just after the case was submitted, there was a deal between South African airlines and Qatar Airways. And again, we saw the intertwined business and other fronts in Qatar. So I think the South Africa is a good example for it.
And just to mention this as a side thing, there was a visit, a very photographed visit of, I don't know if it was the Emir himself or one of his family, presenting a gift to the ICJ, I think a day or 2 days before the hearing took place, of a large boat that symbolized something about Qatari heritage.
Shai, you can see it on my presentation. The boat is the state symbol of Qatar. There is a reason for it.
So that's
okay,
also
we have two. I have got two questions online that I'd like to.
In the Q&A.
Both from Alex Zisman. So let me go to
someone said to me that he helped me with David. Thank for your correction.
Here.
Sorry for
that. Alex's first question says Qatar has proven to be a country deft on hedging its bets and using its soft power to protect itself. How do you think it is processing Iran's ongoing bombing of their facilities as a collateral component of the current war?
Now, it's a great question because there is a misconception that right now this is the end of the relations between Iran and Qatar. And as Alex pointed out, this is not the Qatari raison d'etre. The Qatari raison d'etre is to stay relevant all the time. And for that reason, we can identify the fact we can talk about a unified GCC position. Actually, there is an interview of mine that's going to be published in the JNS, I believe, in the until the end of the week about it. If you like, David, I can send to you. Can
Please,
share it with the community. Glad to. And there I try to present more broadly this point because Qatar actually didn't want to it sounds ridiculous, to present too much anonymity toward Iran. For an example, there was a rebuke call between Qatari foreign minister, that he also was the prime minister, and Iranian foreign minister, that Qatari media highlight the fact that it was very angry conversation. But the fact there was a conversation, there is a connection on Al Jazeera. Just a few seconds after Iran attacked, the same day Iran attacked Qatar, we saw the fact that in Al Jazeera, the Iranian foreign minister said, we have connection to Omani foreign minister and Qatari foreign minister. Qatar didn't want, unlike the UAE and Saudi Arabia, to neglect the Iranian regime. First, maybe Trump will not go all the way, and then we need the connection for them. And second, even if we're gonna establish ourselves in other, we need to balance our operation because, as I mentioned before, we have a joint gas field that I can give you quotes 20 years ago about Iranian politicians that say Qatar stole from us because they extract too much gas. And for that reason, the democration between our shares, it's not preserved. Qatar enjoyed the, let's say, not so efficient Iranian regime. Now, how, Alex, you might ask, you can say we are connected with you after you attacked us? Now, as Shai mentioned before, Azmi Bishara gave you the answer. The answer is, and you can see the narrative in Majid Al-Ansari, the Qatari spokesperson, in Azmi Bishara, in Al Jazeera. Who shoots us is not the state, is the Revolutionary Guard. They are the ones shooting us. The regime is actually lost control. And if this kind of narrative will be, let's say, be more accurate, Qatar can leverage it into a position that's more comfortable to them. Now, you want
He has
me
one
to
more
the other question? The
Yes.
Muslim Brotherhood has been banned in numerous countries. What's Qatar to prevent this trend to extend to other countries? Now, it's interesting, Alex, because during the war, I don't know what you want to see it, Trump announced about the Sudanese Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this is a major development. Why? Because in Sudan, the UAE and Qatar have different proxies. And I believe the fact that the decision of Trump happened just one day after he got a call from MBZ in the UAE is a demonstration to the fact that MBZ convinced him now is the time. Now, it's a very bad news for Qatar because they didn't want. The last chapters of Qatar, when they announced the Egyptian, if I remember correctly, Muslim Brotherhood was less problematic for them because Qatar in Egypt, for an example, or in Lebanon, have different groups they are support. So Qatar at the beginning of Trump's move onto the Muslim Brotherhood, hope they gonna divert him to states that he gonna hurt the Muslim Brotherhood that the less important for them. And there were reports about pressure on Trump to wait a little about one affiliation or others. For an example, we saw it in the US in the Council of Islamic Care, Islamic American Relations, that actually the time that Qatar bought them allowed them to change their stance in terms of just for the facade. So the connection with Muslim Brotherhood, up until the war, it was more convenient to Qatar to leverage Trump, to direct him to places they can live with his decision. I'm not sure if right now we don't see a massive change, but again, I need to wait to see how it develops.
So let me ask you, since we don't have a lot of time left, your views on where do you foresee the relations between Qatar and the rest of the Gulf countries, say a year or so from now, after things have settled down a little bit? There is speculation that is this going to create new opportunities for something like, quote, regional normalization after the war? Will there be an effort by some of the Gulf countries to consider the Abraham Accords? What is the relationship going to be with Israel after the devastation that is occurring now that no one wants to see happen again? Do you have a sense of how open the Qataris, in their skilled use of soft power, their skilled use of their economic power and influence, their position on the Muslim Brotherhood, where do they actually see the short term in terms of their relations with trying to introduce stability into a region where, for economic growth and progress, stability and certainty is so important?
Yesterday, Majid Ansari, the Qatari spokesperson, said in a news conference, nobody dictated us who we are going to talk with. Now, during the war, when all the GCC is furious with Iran, Qatar want to say, we are talking with them. You're not going to dictate us. This is a cautionary tale about the fact we can talk about a GCC stance regarding Israel. For example, you can see even a picture of all the heads of state of the GCC unite in the simplest message about we all united, stay strong, and etc. There isn't unified stance. The UAE and Saudi Arabia saw how Israel is important to the US and why they can help us. There were reports about home front security that sent an emissary to the UAE, help the UAE. And there was a report about UAE delegation in Israel just last week about restocking their interceptors. So UAE, for an example, saw it as we were right to normalize ties with Israel. And the Saudi will see it as opportunity because we also write about wink-wink position regarding Israel. But for Qatar, as we saw it in my presentation, the reason that is to stay unique. Sometimes it's not make sense. You said for economic stability, as other called Qatar, the arsonist and the firefighter. The one that not just want to be the one that puts out the fire, but also cause the fire in terms that you are the one that's gonna call to us to help. For that reason, the Palestinian aspect was very important to them because this was the ticket. When all the Gulf goes to normalization, in their point of view, in the Abraham Accords, Qatar was the one that proud that we stay alone to help the Palestinians. And for them, the Iranian front, the Palestinian front are not connected. And may I say another word that I also said to Israeli establishment, and I will stop here. We don't want Israel to do so. Because when we examine Qatari connection with Israel in the 1990s, because there were Qatari connection, we saw how the connection with Israel was just means to an end. They use us in terms of favorable position in the UN, in terms of to broadcast and publish their energy production, in terms of, as one Indian scholar put it, the road to Washington goes through Tel Aviv. And Israel was an effective tool, but not more than a tool. And I fear, and I doing my best, and believe me, it's a lot, to convince now in Israel that let's not fall to the same pit. In Qatar, we're gonna sound promising promises about the coverage in Al Jazeera. We're gonna change, and we're gonna kick Hamas, and we hear these promises time and time again. But we know how it ends. We saw it before. We saw it 20, 30 years ago. For that reason, I don't think Qatar want. I don't think in Israel, by the way, it's a very toxic politically because every politician that's connected with Qatar right now, it's a kill in the next election. And may I say, I'm pleased with that because I know it's not going to be good for Israel, may I say, and the West.
Okay. Shai, do you have something that you
Just
need to follow up?
a couple of comments on I fully agree with Ariel. Just to remind people, Qatar was completely isolated in 2018 when Israel reached to Qatar to assist with the cash to be moved to the Gaza Strip. All of the other Gulf states boycotted Qatar at that time. I mentioned earlier about the ICJ and the ICC, so it's both. Qatar had a visit, a state official visit, and we can share the link. It's on the ICJ page. And they met also with the then president of ICJ, who was the Lebanese judge who later became the president of the prime minister of Lebanon. And that happened between the second order and the third order that the ICJ issued. The third order that was issued a week after dealt with stopping the offensive in Rafah. So just to put things into perspective on the ICJ, The Guardian published that when there was a sexual complaint against Karim Khan, who was the chief prosecutor in the ICC, Qatar tried to influence the person who filed the complaint to retract and close the matter. And again, this is The Guardian, not the Telegraph or any other newspapers.
Right. Okay. Ariel, thank you. This was a fascinating 90 minutes. We're most grateful that you were able to give us your time and your expertise. And I think we all learned from you. It's complex, especially as complex as it is for us from a distance. You who work in the weeds and the details, I'm sure you have much more to share if we only had more time. But thank you so very, very much. You
Glad.
brought to us some insights and knowledge that most of us wouldn't otherwise have. As you said in the titles for this, when I asked you, you suggested Qatar microstate, but macro role. And it's macro and it's complex, and in some ways it's counterintuitive. So thank you so very much. And for all
Glad
those
to.
who are viewing, let me just remind you that we're having a session on March 19th entitled Civil Society and Democracy, the Intersection of Faith, Politics, and Social Justice with Mikhail Manikin, who's the Van Leer Fellow at the Van Leer Foundation and in Jerusalem, and is director of the Alliance Fellowship Network. So that'll be on Israeli civil society and democracy next week.
David, may I share a social network affiliation of mine for
Please,
someone?
anything.
Okay, sure. So I send you right now. If you like to communicate and ask specific questions, feel free. Anytime. I'm glad to be of
Thank you.
assistance.
And Ariel, if you want to share any documents or anything you've written, you can send it to me and I'll make sure it's available to others.
Great.
Thank you so very much and stay safe.
Thank you
Stay
very
safe
much.
also here. Sorry to hear about what's happened.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.